and never in pain.
But experts say that doesn't mean Joseph Wood was properly drugged. The drug in question is midazolam, part of a 2-drug cocktail used in lethal injection. It's supposed to knock the inmate out before another drug, hydromorphone, kills them.
Joseph Wood was not a nice man in any sense of the phrase, convicted of killing a former lover and her father, gunning them both down in something of a jealous rage. And there are those who still live with this crime to this day, seeing members of their families savagely murdered. So when Wood was recently put to death in the state of Arizona, an execution that took almost 2 hours to finish, it separated the death penalty community once again into 2 distinct camps. How could something like this happen? And what's the big deal? Welcome to MidPoint. Dr. Elaina George is a board-certified physician, and Greg Gianforcaro, a defense attorney. We welcome you both to dig deeper into the issue. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
First, I think I'm going to begin by going to you on this one, Greg, because as an attorney, let me ask you that question that still a lot of people are asking. The brother-in-law of the woman who was killed in the Joseph Wood case looked square in the cameras and said, for those of you who are so upset about what's going on, I believe he used an expletive there as well, to basically say that we don't care. This was somebody who killed our loved ones. Is it not fair to say that in this death penalty case and in this death penalty issue, we still have an awful lot of people who feel that way? Why should we be so concerned about the person who did the crime?
We do. And listen, I acknowledge that. I understand that's a reality. That is a very good argument that anyone who is in favor of the death penalty can make. But that does not justify what happened here. I mean, under the circumstances, we live in the United States. This is a civilized society that we live in. And to put someone to death in this way, I don't think it's justified. We're not in a society where we torture somebody. And really, under these circumstances, that's what it amounts to. One of the reporters that witnessed Joe Wood's execution said it was like throwing a live fish on the beach and watching it just gulp to death. I mean, that's no way to kill somebody, or at least put someone to death under these circumstances. Look, I'm not trying to justify what Joseph Wood did. What he did was wrong. He had his day in court, he was found guilty, and he was put and given lethal injection. But lethal injection under these circumstances has to be appropriate under the circumstances. We don't want anybody to suffer no matter what their circumstances.
Greg, though, you use the word torture in here, and is it not fair to say that if you use the word torture, that indicates that somebody was planning it, someone did it purposefully, someone actually wanted it to happen that way, and in the instance of this and other botched executions, it's not as if torture was planned, this was an accident?
That's true, but in this situation, Joseph Wood, prior to his sentence, prior to his being put to death, actually had after Dennis McGuire, that's the gentleman whose death penalty was botched in Ohio, after that happened, they actually petitioned the court to hold back and to gain information to see if the drugs that were administered in the Ohio death penalty situation where that was botched were the same drugs here. That request was denied, and then Joseph Wood was put to death. And then only after the situation came out with regard to Joseph Wood was it learned that the drugs, in fact, were the same. And I think now Arizona, because of what happened to Joseph Wood, is now looking back on the situation and saying, well, look, maybe we've got to rethink the situation. Well, that doesn't make Joseph Wood's situation any better and doesn't take it back. But under these circumstances, at least he had the right to know after Dennis McGuire's situation in Ohio, something that he asked was denied the right, and then he was executed, and the same problems that happened with the McGuire case happened in Joseph Wood's case. So it's not like this is an isolated situation.
Okay, I'm going to get to that in a moment. Dr. George, let me turn to you on this, because we're dealing with a drug cocktail here, hydromorphone and midazolam here. I am told by medical professionals now that one of the biggest issues here is we are no longer getting a drug that used to be used, and we are now basically in many ways testing different drugs and trying to find the right cocktail to basically execute at an efficient rate. Is that correct?
That is correct. Prior to 2011, most executions are carried out with a 3-drug cocktail, something called sodium thiopental, a paralytic agent, and something to stop the heart, usually potassium. After 2011, the drug company, and there was only one drug company that made it, went out of business or basically decided no longer to make the medication. So we had to turn to Europe and something called pentobarbital, which also is hard to find because the European drug manufacturers do not want to provide medications for lethal injections. So that's where we are now, where we're trying to make something up to get the job done. And that's where the midazolam and the hydromorphone come in.
That seems to almost be amateurish in many ways, doctor, because no matter what you're doing in medicine, if you're planning on doing something, it would seem as if you would test, you would try to get things to a certain point where it would work for you. And yet here we are 3 years later, and it still seems like, and again, please excuse me for being blunt here, but it seems like some people are just bumbling around here trying to find something that works.
I think you've actually said it very much correctly. It's trial and error. And some of these executions, they've actually had to increase the dose of the medication because the prisoner didn't die with the first dose. And these aren't exactly lethal medications. Midazolam, also known as Versed, is really an anti-anxiety medication. It's something called a benzodiazepine. And hydromorphone is a narcotic. So these are not really drugs designed to be quick in terms of killing somebody. They're not really used for that in the first place. So it's really all about titrating it, changing the doses, trying to make sure that you put enough in the patient, or the prisoner, I should say, to do the job. And it can be excruciating. 2 hours is way too long for something like this. And you're right, he's not the only one that's happened to.
You just said drugs not designed to be quick. As a professional, I know that your first task is not to take a life. Your task is to save lives.
Correct.
But from a medical standpoint here, as we look at this, is there a cocktail? Are there 2 drugs or 3 drugs that are currently available, something that would be the humane way to execute somebody under a lethal injection, drugs that you know of?
Sorry, I missed a part of what you said.
Okay.
But in answer to part of your question, these medications slow your breathing, and they don't stop your heart. They just basically, you'd suffocate under them because your breathing rate will drop until you don't have enough oxygen, and that's how you die. So it's a very slow process.
Is there anything that you know of as a medical professional, or things that you don't have to quote it to me, I guess, as far as the drugs are concerned, but are there drugs out there that would do this humanely? May still have a problem hearing me, doctor.
Yeah, I can actually hear you now.
Okay, is there something that would do it humanely?
The way they had it set up initially was probably.
Okay, I tell you what, we're going to go ahead. We're going to come over here for a sec. We're going to see if we can reconnect that, because I want to get an answer to that. We only have a few minutes left. Guys, let's see if we can reconnect her as well. Greg, I'm going to come to you again on this. There are still people in this country, though, who think that we must have capital punishment. We must have the ability to execute and the right to execute people who simply commit heinous crimes. Are we witnessing a turning point in America right now, or is this simply just going to be another, here comes the argument again, it will continue to be as is, in your opinion?
No, we could be witnessing a turning point, because anyone who is on the fence on this issue, look, if I am pro-death penalty, which I realize a lot of people are, all you're doing by allowing these types of executions where there's pain and suffering, gulping, distress, what have you, all you're doing is giving the anti-death penalty people a real platform to really argue that this is not humane, and that if we're going to put people to death, we have to do it in a humane fashion.
So if you're going to have capital punishment, and again, I'm not trying to be flip here, but
we live in, and this is what the United States was all about. I mean, if you go back in history, we've always tried to take the humane approach and taken the upper hand. We're not in the business of doing these kind of mass executions where people suffer. We don't do that. And that's why we do things the way we do. And history's brought that. You know, we don't hang people anymore. Okay, we give them lethal injection. That's why we're at the point where we are.
Okay, I have to stop you there. I understand what you're saying, but I have Dr. George back. I only have 60 seconds. Dr. George, again, within 60 seconds, briefly, are there drugs that you are aware of that could get the job done in a humane fashion?
There has to be something that makes somebody unconscious, something that will paralyze their muscles, something that stops the heart quickly. And the drug cocktail they used before with the muscle, something that will paralyze you, something like succinylcholine, potassium to stop the heart, and something that makes you completely unaware, like the sodium thiopental, would be the best cocktail. But since most of those drugs are not available anymore, we have a problem. And it needs to be addressed, and it needs to be standardized.
Drugs exist, but there are not drugs that are currently available to the correctional system to use.
Correct.
Okay, that is the answer. Unfortunately, we are all out of time. Let's please do it again. Dr. Elaina George and Greg Gianforcaro, thank you so much for joining us, and I promise you we're going to come back and do this all again. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye-bye.
There's some good points in there about things that do exist, and if you're going to execute them right. That certainly is an opinion that so many people have right now. Next up, Paul Ryan has a plan to curtail poverty, and the plan is not exactly being met with the rousing support he perhaps had hoped. That's coming up right here on MidPoint.